Does the name Gutzon Borglum mean anything to you? Okay, how about the name Mount Rushmore? Of course, everyone knows that one, so who's this Borglum character? He's the artist behind the design and construction of the iconic landmark. This year marks 100 years since the U.S. government approved construction on the massive project in South Dakota. But you might be surprised to learn that the original design for Mount Rushmore wasn't a presidential portrait. To fully understand the initial idea, it's important to go back and grasp what the West looked like in the 1920s.
Doane Robinson was the state historian of South Dakota for a number of years, and he was the state historian in the 1920s when South Dakota's economy was tanking. And it was tanking in large measure because post-World War I, commodities prices and agricultural prices slumped big time in South Dakota and the rest of the Midwest. And what that meant is that in the state of South Dakota, they were experiencing the Great Depression about a decade before the rest of the country. Banks were closing, farms were foreclosing, unemployment was skyrocketing. While the rest of the United States was partying, South Dakota was suffering. And Doane Robinson really wanted to be able to diversify the state's economy away from agriculture, away from commodities. So he had an idea to really ramp up the tourism industry in South Dakota.
That's Matthew Davis, author of A Biography of a Mountain, The Making and Meaning of Mount Rushmore.
So Robinson thought it would be a great idea to carve sculptures in the Black Hills of historical Western figures, people like the great Lakota leader Red Cloud, or Lewis and Clark, or George Armstrong Custer, or Sacagawea, the guide who led Lewis and Clark west. He wanted to carve them into the Black Hills to attract these car tourists that were beginning to drive from the Black Hills of South Dakota to Yellowstone National Park.
And you might be wondering where the name Mount Rushmore came from. Before carving ever began, the peak had many names, including the Six Grandfathers, as it was known to the Native American tribe, the Lakota. Later, settlers used a range of informal names like Cougar Mountain and Keystone Cliffs. Its permanent name arrived in 1885, when a New York lawyer named Charles Rushmore asked a local guide what the mountain was called. The guide allegedly replied that it had never had a real name until now, and they called it Rushmore. The name stuck, and in 1930, the United States Board on Geographic Names officially recognized it as Mount Rushmore. As for Robinson, his idea to transform the mountain into a tribute to the western frontier was an initial success. However, that idea quickly changed once the famed sculptor Gutzon Borglum joined the project.
Robinson really was ecstatic that he had been able to hire a man like Borglum to do the work. And so he let him do whatever it was he wanted to do and gave very little pushback to the changing of the ideas. Robinson wanted it to be economic, and it has succeeded in being economic. Borglum was interested in the economics behind it, but he was more interested in the politics behind it. He wanted to create Mount Rushmore into an homage to the political system of the United States. He thought that the American democratic system of government was the apotheosis of Western civilization, and he wanted to create something that reflected its greatness. And his initial idea was to carve 4 presidents into the mountain that reflected American empire and American exceptionalism. So you had, Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt, who he chose for different aspects of that empire. And they were the ones that he initially thought of. They were the ones that he carved, and they're the ones that are there today.
Before he was hired to work on Mount Rushmore, Borglum was the original sculptor and designer of Stone Mountain, a massive Confederate memorial carved into a granite mountain just outside of Atlanta. At the time of its inception in 1915, the project was financially backed by the Ku Klux Klan.
Borglum's relationship with the memorial was in many ways a relationship with the Klan. The Stone Mountain Memorial Association was full of Klan members. Borglum corresponded with Klan leaders across the country. He introduced Klan leaders to the president, to senators, to other politicians. He was very influential in terms of shaping Klan policy. And he did have many of the beliefs that the Klan did have. He shared their anti-immigrant views, their anti-Semitic views. He was a racist. And I think all of that was something that was part of Borglum's personality and politics while he was carving Stone Mountain.
Interestingly, none of these more controversial details are publicized on any of the signage or educational materials at Mount Rushmore.
Borglum's affiliation with Stone Mountain, Borglum's affiliation with the Ku Klux Klan is something that is still hidden at Mount Rushmore. I mean, the memorial at Mount Rushmore just recently created and produced and is now showing new interpretive films that were, when I first started this project, they were very outdated, over 2 decades old. And so the new films do a much better job of placing Rushmore in the larger history of the Black Hills, but they still omit the fact that Borglum was affiliated with the Klan. They still omit the fact that he worked on Stone Mountain. And to me, there is no Mount Rushmore without Stone Mountain. Borglum learned so much practically on his work at Stone Mountain, and he brought so much politically with him from his time in Atlanta as well.
Today, just as when the memorial was first conceived, the Black Hills remain sacred to the Lakota people. They're the original inhabitants of this land, and the Black Hills sit at the center of their cosmological beliefs. Yet until 2004, Native American history and culture were barely acknowledged at Mount Rushmore.
The United States took the Black Hills of South Dakota in a very traumatic event for Lakota many generations on. And that moment also sort of led to other very traumatic points of history, whether it's the massacre of Wounded Knee in 1890, the boarding schools that you referred to, having kids taken from families and put in residential boarding schools, having more land taken from Lakota families. All of that is reflected in how many Lakota, not all, how many Lakota see Mount Rushmore standing today in the Black Hills.
Davis says that for many Native Americans, the faces of 4 white men carved into their sacred mountain feels like sacrilege.
It's hard to come up with an analogy. I've tried before, and it's hard because it's not something that's easily relatable. Take one of our, most sacred sites in the United States. I mean, let's just say theoretically that, the White House is one of our sacred sites because of who we are as a people. And let's say there was another people that came into the United States and killed off 95% of Americans, as Americans killed off 95% of Native Americans, and then, built a memorial in the White House to 4 of their leaders. I mean, that would be about the equivalent of what we'd be feeling. And I think, there's a great deal of trauma that's associated with Mount Rushmore because of that.
This perspective shows how unresolved the monument's legacy remains and why proposals to alter or expand Rushmore still strike a nerve today. Earlier this year, Republican House Representative Anna Paulina Luna introduced a bill to add President Donald Trump's face to the memorial. Most geologists say that isn't physically possible and would risk the structural integrity of the entire mountain. The addition would also likely face a lot of political resistance. Meanwhile, 15 miles away, work on the Crazy Horse Memorial, a tribute to the great Lakota leader, continues more than 50 years after it started. Many see it as a direct rebuttal to Rushmore, but Davis has a different view.
I came to have almost more problems with Crazy Horse than I did with Mount Rushmore. And that's because, for a lot of reasons. But one of them is, Crazy Horse was a great Lakota leader who refused to have his photo taken. He didn't want his image captured. And so, extend that hundreds of years down the line, how do you think he would feel about having his face carved into the Black Hills? My guess is that he would abhor it. And I think there's also a lot of, Native peoples around the Black Hills who don't want the hills to be desecrated in any way, whether they're carving 4 white presidents or a Lakota leader.
As for Mount Rushmore, the site draws in 2.5 million visitors each year, making it one of the most popular landmarks in the country and a major driver of South Dakota's tourism economy. On its 100th anniversary, the memorial offers a clear look at the priorities of the period in which it was carved, highlighting both the stories the nation wanted to tell and the ones it overlooked. Davis adds that the portrait also holds different meanings to different people.
Memorials like Mount Rushmore, like any historical memorials that we have across the country, they're not static. Just because they're carved into granite, just because they're made of marble or concrete, doesn't mean their meanings are set in stone. They evolve as we evolve, as our understanding of history evolves. And I think that's a great thing. And so I think as we commemorate the 100th anniversary of the dedication of Mount Rushmore, I think it's important to sort of understand that, how Mount Rushmore was designed in 1925 is different than how it looks to us in 2025. And that's great. I think we should be able to move with meanings of memorials as our understanding of histories evolve, as our understanding of ourselves as a country evolve.
Matthew Davis's book, A Biography of a Mountain, The Making and Meaning of Mount Rushmore, is available now online and can be requested through your local bookstore. To find out more about our guest this week, visit viewpointsradio.org. The story was written and produced by Polly Hansen and Amira Zaveri. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Gary Price.